How's it going, guys? This is John, and welcome to my NEStalgiaholic show. This episode, I'm going to talk about the Smurfs. I'm hugely fond of the Smurfs. I grew up watching the Smurfs on the cartoon show, and when I think of the Smurfs, I think about the 80s for sure. The cartoon show was produced by Hanna-Barbera. It aired on NBC Saturday mornings from 1981 through 1990. After that, USA Network picked it up and played it from 1990 to 1993. There were 256 episodes in total for the Smurfs. Hugely successful cartoon series, won some Emmy Awards and won a whole bunch of awards as well. So definitely a Smurfs cartoon. If you haven't checked them out, DVDs have been released of the seasons. I really encourage you guys to check the Smurfs out. But many people may be surprised that the Smurfs, even though they were popular in the 80s, probably the biggest time they were popular, actually started in the 50s, actually 1958 to be exact. And it was created in Belgium by the cartoonist called Peyo. Well, that's his pen name anyway. His real name was actually Pierre Collerford. And Peyo had been working on a number of comics at this time. One of them that was pretty popular was called Johan and Pierre Loli. And one of the stories was titled Flute in the Six Holes, which is translated in English, Flute in the Six Holes. And in this little mini story, they actually encounter a flute and they play this magical mystery flute. And this is done in like kind of medieval European stage. Okay, this is the time frame. And there's actually this blue little creature, and they call it the Les Smurfs. And I'm probably mispronouncing it. It's actually French. It's Les Smurfs. I don't know. I'm probably butchering the name, but that's what they call them. And they were wearing, they were blue-skinned. They were small. They had a small village with mushroom houses. And there was a main Smurf was called Papa Smurf. He had a red cap, red pants, and the other Smurfs were white cap, white pants. These caps are actually interesting because they're Phrygian caps, which is actually during the Roman times. It actually meant people wore these during the Roman times to symbolize freedom. So there was some symbolism there in creating them purposely to wear these Phrygian caps, which is kind of interesting. But nonetheless, people were really caught on to these new blue characters, and it spun off, and they created their own series. There's been 30 comics created for the Smurfs. And in case you guys are wondering where Smurfs, the word came from, it's actually the Dutch translation. In German, the word is Strumpf, and that basically translates to sock. But they actually asked Peyo, and they asked him where this word came from. Story has it that he was talking to one of his colleagues, and his colleague named Andre couldn't really think of the word in French for salt when he asked, pass the salt. And he said, passe les Smurfs, basically. And they kind of joked around, and it kind of caught on. So that's kind of how the whole word came about. It doesn't really mean much. Now, the interesting thing about Smurfs itself, if you watch the cartoon, if you've read any of the comic books, they kind of replace a lot of the nouns and verbs with the word Smurf. So, for example, quit smurfing around. They'll say that in the cartoon, and you kind of have to put two and two together on what that actually means. One thing I found kind of weird about the show, I don't know if it's weird, but unusual, is that there's very few women characters or girl characters in the cartoon in the series. You had Smurfette, you had Sazette, you had, I think there was a Nana Smurf or something like that, but other than that, that was pretty much it. There was all these Smurfs with all these guys. Papa Smurf was the main Smurf. You also had other Smurfs, and there was like Clumsy Smurf, there was Lazy Smurf, Taylor Smurf, and all their names were based on basically what they were, or an adjective of who they were as a character. They lived in kind of a small village or town that were, as I mentioned before, where houses were built out of mushrooms, and no humans could really find this small town because they're tiny. And basically Gargamel is the main antagonist in the Smurfs world, and him and his cat Ezreal would actually go and hunt down these Smurfs. So they would come out with all these tricks and things. In fact, Smurfette, who is a very popular character in the cartoon series, was initially created by Gargamel to kind of entice the Smurfs from coming to his castle, basically, kind of to trap the Smurfs. And Papa Smurf actually was able to convert or unbrainwash Smurfette, so to speak, to join the village, and she stayed. But in the comic book, she actually leaves the village. But in the series, she stayed because they wanted to appeal to the girls, of course, in the series. Animation is great. The song is the intro song. I think most of us would recognize right away. Speaking of music in the series, a lot of the music in the series is done in famous classical music as well. It's really a shame that the series ended, to be honest with you. One of the reasons it did end was because the low ratings, the ratings kept going down, and in the later seasons they did some kind of weird time traveling thing, so they make it more of a history lesson, which didn't really cut on with the audience, unfortunately. But as I mentioned before, you can get the series on DVD. Smurfs is still very popular. Obviously, Sony has released 2 Smurf movies recently that have been live action movies. They've done pretty well in the box office. I believe they're planning on making a 3rd movie as well. So Smurfs are very Still alive, still today as far as popularity goes. But I'd say definitely the peak for the Smurfs, for me anyway, the heyday for the Smurfs was definitely in the 80s, because I remember growing up playing these. Of course, along with the popularity of Smurfs comes merchandise for the Smurfs. In fact, the very first video game I ever played was this game right here for the ColecoVision. This is Smurf Rescue in Gargamel's Castle. This was also ported to the Atari 2600. This is the ColecoVision port. This is the very first video game I ever played. It's a platforming game. Playing it now is not very good, but it got me into video games, and I appreciate that for Smurfs. There's another Smurf game for the ColecoVision called, it's a painting game. It's basically like Mario Paint, dumbed down to ColecoVision graphics, but that's kind of cool too. And there's actually these figurines that were very, very popular, still are today. And these figures are actually came out, I believe they were available through McDonald's, the kids' meals at McDonald's, but there's a ton of these different figurines that came out. They have different items that they're holding up, which is very cool. Some of the food that they had for Smurfs was awesome. Smurf Berry Crunch by Post is probably my favorite cereal. I would die to have a box of Smurf Berry Crunch today. I just love Smurf Berry Crunch. They also had Smurf Magic Berries, which was another cereal that came out by Post, which was pretty decent as well with marshmallows. But this Smurf Berry Crunch, to me, was the standard for cereals for the 80s. I absolutely loved it. Another interesting food item was Chef Boyardee had a Smurf pasta that they had, canned pasta that came out. I remember eating that growing up. But I have a lot of fond memories about the Smurfs. I'm just curious what you guys think about the Smurfs. Do you guys like the show? Do you guys like the comic books? What are your memories about the Smurfs? Thanks for leaving a comment below, guys. I appreciate you guys subscribing. I appreciate you guys commenting and sharing this video. Be sure to like this as well. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you guys soon, and have a Smurftastic day. Take care.